Hi, we're back at the Roundtable, and I'm pleased to have some visitors to the Roundtable, visitors from out of town. Virginia Parks is with us. Virginia is here in Inglewood from Chicago, And first of all, I want them to know that, but I want you to tell us why you're here, and then we'll take it from there. Now, why are you in Inglewood?
I am an academic. I teach at the University of Chicago at a place called the School of Social Service Administration, which is School of Social Work and Social Welfare. And I'm engaged in a research project with my colleague, Dorian Warren, whom you're going to speak with shortly. And we're engaged in a research project looking at broadly the issue of race and class and urban economic development. But specifically, we're comparing these anti-Walmart fights, campaigns in Inglewood to a campaign that's currently happening in Chicago right now. So we're trying to understand, what happened specifically with these two campaigns, and that's why we're in Inglewood, because we're doing a number of interviews with different actors, from your council members to community activists to clergy, trying to get a sense of what exactly happened, but then also trying to understand what the primary issues were, how the issue was framed, why people came to be involved, or why people were pro-Walmart. So that would be something that would be of interest to us as well. But then trying to understand what's very different about what happened here in Inglewood to what's happening in Chicago, or what's similar. To give you an example of some similarities and why we chose these as two case studies, Inglewood has a large African American population, I believe around 46–47%.
It was much larger, too.
Okay. And Chicago also has a large African American population, about 36%. So here are two cities, two communities with relatively large African American communities. The specific neighborhood, there are two neighborhoods that Walmart wanted to come and build in Chicago. Those are heavily African American neighborhoods. So what is it about Walmart coming into these African American communities, and how did those communities respond? Now, we do understand that there's also a large Latino population in Inglewood as well as in Chicago. So we would maybe then put it, how do communities of color respond? And maybe race doesn't really play a role in these campaigns. That's something that we're trying to understand as well. But on the face of it, they're very similar in just the sort of racial demographics. So what is it about Walmart wanting to come in? But then also, how do these communities maybe differ along socioeconomic lines, along class lines? And did that play a part of it? And then just quite honestly understanding how these communities mobilize, organize, how they come together. Do they come together through their religious institutions, through their mosques, through their churches, through their congregations? Do they come together through block clubs? Do they come together as members of labor unions? So these are the types of questions that we're asking.
Now, these are questions that you're asking for what reason now? Is it a thesis?
We're writing a book.
You're writing a book, along with your colleague,
Dorian Warren. Mm-hmm. And he's a political scientist.
We'll be talking with him, but I just wondered, are you done with Inglewood and the questions and the interviews?
Far from it, just at the beginning, really. Well, we're almost completed with the interviews, but as far as understanding what happened, we really need to take these interviews back home, really sit down and think about them. We've also done a lot of archival work, so we've been looking at how the issue was covered in the media. Probably we'll be looking at voting patterns as well, and trying to get an idea, not just of that special election that happened in 2004, but just voting patterns in general in Inglewood, and trying to understand that against Chicago as well.
This sounds like a fascinating book. It certainly is a great concept. Who came up with the idea to do a book? It's great. It's a wonderful idea.
Well, if I had to be truthful about it, it would be an editor who we originally were thinking about a collection of essays written by a number of different people. Both Dorian and I were very involved with putting together a conference around Walmart or about Walmart in Chicago that happened in January of this year, and trying to understand these broad issues around Walmart, but particularly issues related to race and gender. So starting with the issue of employment and looking at the class action suits around racial discrimination as well as gender discrimination. And so I guess I think eventually would have come to the idea on our own, but it was an editor who said, this is a book and you just need to write the book and it'll have a much broader audience and it's a story that needs to be told and nobody seems to be telling it right now, so we would like to tell that.
That was my point, because it's an important subject, because this is happening around the country. It's been happening. I know that Inglewood, when the whole Walmart thing came into being, well, it came and then it recame, people were watching it all over the country. How does race play into this in your mind? Do you think it does more than anything else?
That's a great question, right? And that is the question that we're trying to answer. And it's not exactly clear right now. From what a few people have said in interviews is, it does seem interesting that Walmart would choose Inglewood as its first place to come into LA County, particularly to build a superstore. And why is that? Is it because Walmart saw Inglewood as a smaller city that wouldn't pay much attention, or is it because it's both a smaller city as well as a community of color that maybe wouldn't be that mobilized and would desperately want this kind of economic development and so would quickly rubber stamp it? But I have to say we're still trying to decipher that. I think that socioeconomic status, class is definitely part of the story, and Dorian will speak to that, particularly in Chicago, of how these two neighborhoods in Chicago differ, even though they're African-American communities. One is a more middle-class community than on the west side. And so the vote, I'm sort of beating him to the punchline, but the vote split in the Chicago City Council. The alderman said, don't build it on the south side, but you can build on the west side. So that could be something. Is there something about middle-class African-American communities that they feel like they don't need this type of development, that they can hold out for something better? Is it because in middle-class black neighborhoods you find more entrepreneurs and more small business owners who would be very directly impacted by Walmart? So these are the sorts of questions that I can't give you a definitive answer right now about, but they're definitely questions that are rising to the surface, and they're questions that we want to ferret out.
The rural-urban question. In other words, Walmart began as rural and are now, the rural-urban question.
That's a huge issue. I mean, this is why we see this as a book about urban economic development, and the working title right now is Walmart Comes to the City. Walmart needs to grow, and I'm sure you've all heard this because there's been so much debate around this issue in Inglewood and Los Angeles, but Walmart needs to grow, and it grows by expanding. It's saturated the rural market. It needs to find a new market of consumers, and the urban area is that place. In all sorts of neighborhoods, middle class to low income, all sorts of people need to buy things, right? They need to shop. And so Walmart perceives, and I think rightly so, a huge untapped market. And so this is the new frontier. But what's at stake? And can they go into urban communities in the same way that they went into rural communities? And we think that there are a host of different issues at stake that actually we think that Walmart learned a lot from Inglewood. and they were rather surprised by what happened here and have learned very well. And so that's playing out in Chicago.
Well, they were beat about the head and shoulders here, and I would think that the book is going to be very helpful when it indeed is published. So congratulations on that. I want to get to talk to your colleague, but I want to thank you so much. And maybe perhaps when you've done the book and you're doing the book tour, you come back this way, the Urban Roundtable is always open to talk about things like that.
We would be happy to do so. Thank you very much.
Parks, thank you so much for being a part of the Urban Roundtable today.
Thank you.
Bye. All right, we're back, and we're now talking with Dorian Warren, who, of course, is Virginia's colleague in this. What you didn't plan to talk about the book, I know, but I think it's a great idea. But what I'd like to do is I'd like for you to kind of cover some areas that Virginia left for you to talk about. You're here, and the whole idea of this incredible entity, this big monumental company.
The largest retailer in the world.
Exactly. Which started in a rural area and is now just moving all over the place, trying to move into the urban market and take advantage of that. You can't blame them, they're business people, but what do they offer? What have you found out since you've been here, for instance? I know they're doing the same thing wanting to do the same thing in Chicago, where you're from. What have you learned here that you can take back there? And let's talk about what it is you learned.
One of the things I think we've learned is that Walmart still owns the land right across the street from the Forum, where they originally wanted to build a supercenter. And it's clear by the fact that they still own the land that they have every intention of coming back here and maybe buying up more land to build more supercenters. I think one of the things we've learned from Inglewood and Chicago, what we'll also learn from Oakland and New York, Cleveland, and other cities with large African-American populations, is that Walmart sees dollar signs in urban America. And they only see these dollar signs because they've exhausted their expansion in rural America. So they did start off as a very rural company. Their market primarily were working class whites. And so they expanded across the South. Then they went into suburban areas. And as my colleague Virginia Parks mentioned earlier, urban cities with people of color are the final frontier for Walmart. Wall Street is saying you have to expand into urban America to stay profitable. And they now see this large untapped market of trillions of dollars for black and brown communities to contribute to their sales. So that's one of the things that I think we've learned is Walmart is here to stay. And that raises the question of what power do local communities have to stipulate the conditions under which Walmart is going to operate in our communities.
Well, you've learned what Inglewood had for them when they came hunting. Now, what about, I mean, they still own the land.
Right.
Now, the brown and black workers, what does, in your mind, what is the problem that Walmart has created for themselves in dealing with, you know, salaries? I mean, how are the Walmart people dealing with having to live up to treating people like human beings?
I think they don't see it as a fundamental issue they're doing wrong. I think they see criticism of their poverty wage practices as a public relations problem. And I think when they came into Inglewood, they underestimated the residents of Inglewood saying, oh no, you're not going to come in and disrespect us. You have to go through the proper processes here like you do in Santa Monica or anywhere else. I think their response to the sex discrimination case, to claims of racial discrimination, to claims of poverty wages has been, we're just going to bombard you with commercials until you realize how good we are for you. It's a very southern paternalistic type of reaction. It's
Right.
not,
Very
we're going to
Arkansas.
change our practices to pay
Right.
people a living wage. We're just going to keep showing commercials to tell you how good we are for you and hope that we wear you down over time so that you then will accept us.
Right. So their whole thing is to buy cheap. I think to
That's
buy
right.
cheap.
That's
and
right.
Employ cheap, really.
That's right. That's
And
right.
that was the big problem here in Inglewood. What are you going to do with now? Virginia was saying that you guys are not done yet. The interviews are basically done. What else do you have to do here?
Well, the Chicago case, which is the second part of our book, is still ongoing. And in fact, the Chicago City Council next Wednesday, a week from today, the Chicago City Council is voting on a big box living wage ordinance that would regulate that Walmart and Target and Home Depot and all the other big box stores, if they want to do business in the city of Chicago, they have to pay a living wage. They have to offer health care benefits. They have to hire people within the community. And so Walmart and Target now have come out in strong opposition to this ordinance. And they've said, if this ordinance passes, we are not going to expand into the city of Chicago. So they're really trying to scare our political representatives. And they have done a really good job of dividing the black community, at least in Chicago. There are many, especially black ministers in Chicago, who are supporting Walmart's position. And
Same thing happened here.
I won't go into reasons why, but that's what's happening now. So we're going to wait and see what actually happens next week in the Chicago City Council, and then we're going to write that story and compare that to what happened here in Inglewood.
Mm-hmm. All right, then what Walmart is doing is dividing the community. Mm-hmm. They're hiring people like Andrew Young. I guess that's Atlanta. And talk a bit about how they're doing that and what they're achieving by doing that.
Again, Walmart sees the criticisms criticisms of inequality, poverty, wages, racial discrimination, sex discrimination as a public relations problem. So what's the solution? Well, we'll hire people. We'll hire Andy Young, Reverend Andy Young, former Ambassador Andrew Young.
Wonderful guy.
In his previous life, in his previous work. He was great. But now he has been hired by Walmart to convince black people that Walmart's good for them, to put it frankly. So just earlier this week, he was in Chicago to convince black elected leaders and other ministers in Chicago that Walmart's good for them. Not that Walmart's going to change their practices, not that Walmart's going to agree to a living wage in Chicago, but that Walmart is good for them and they should listen to him. So he's putting his credentials on the line for Walmart.
And for the dollar.
That's right.
They're paying him. They're paying him.
We'll find out soon how much they're paying him, but he's getting paid handsomely.
How are you going to do that?
Well, Walmart has to report all of their activities. So this is all public information.
I see. But how disappointing is that?
And so Andy Young isn't the only one. I think it on one level, this signals a larger failure of black leadership in this contemporary period, of abandoning some of the principles of the civil rights movement, of the very thing that Dr. King was assassinated for in Memphis, the right of workers to be treated with respect and dignity and a living wage. This is a testament to at least the failure of many of our black leaders in the post-civil rights period.
Indeed, and I think it started right after Martin was killed, and all of a sudden leadership became something else. Leadership became, where can I go? It's like the lobbyist. It's like the congressperson that leaves Congress and begins to lobby in Washington, D.C. for a lot of money. And it's very, very disappointing. Very disappointing. Talk a little bit more about what the structure is going to be like as it relates to the book.
So we're thinking of, simply we want to tell the story. We want to tell the story of what happened here in Inglewood. Why did Inglewood residents rise up and vote against the proposed Walmart? And then tell the story of why was the black community in Chicago divided on this same question. Hopefully we can tell a story, at least from the Chicago end, we could tell a story of a victory about the ways in which local communities can say to large, powerful corporations, we want you to do business here, but under our terms, not under your terms. So we first want to tell that story, but then really think about what role do race and class play in broader economic development decisions in our cities across the country? That's going to be the second piece of the book, sort of that analysis of racial politics and class, issues of class in these urban economic development decisions.
Now, from your point of view, what did happen here in Inglewood as it relates to this whole Walmart thing?
We are still trying to figure that out, but as far as I can tell, I think Walmart came in very arrogantly and assumed that Inglewood residents would gleefully accept the fact that they were even here in the community and they wanted to come here. And I think they miscalculated the broader respect that Inglewood residents have for the democratic process.
Sure.
The voice that they have, the everyday voice they have in economic development decisions that happen here in the city. And so once residents were educated as to, and educated by a coalition of clergy leaders and political activists and union leaders and elected officials who were united, it seemed to be, on this issue. At the end, once residents were educated, they said, hey, no, we're not going to stand for this. Walmart is no different than the mom and pop store around the corner that has to go through the same process.
Play by the rules.
That's right. Yeah. And so that's what we think happened here in Inglewood.
Now, you're the Chicago situation. Where I know Virginia was saying, and as were you, that Walmart have their tentacles. Mm-hmm. Where does that stand at this point?
In Chicago, as an African American community, we're divided on this question. Walmart has successfully said to many black leaders, although I'd say that hesitantly, I'm not sure all of them are leaders, but they've said, we're going to bring you jobs, desperately needed jobs that you need in your community. They haven't made any promises as to if those jobs would really go to community residents. They refuse to say, we are willing to pay $10 an hour for a living wage. So they refuse to put anything in writing. And what many of the more progressive black elected officials and clergy are saying is, if Walmart wants to come to town, they need to agree. If they're not going to agree in writing, then we're going to mandate through city legislation that they adhere to paying a living wage and offering health care benefits. So we're in the midst of this debate right now in Chicago. One side is saying any job is better than no job. The other side is saying we want jobs, but quality jobs are what are acceptable to us, not poverty level jobs, at least on the south and west sides, which are mostly black. It's okay for Costco to go on the north side and pay a living wage. But you're saying to us, Walmart, that you're going to come and offer us whatever you want to and we're going to take it. So people are standing up and saying that we're not going to let that happen.
What is that living wage in Chicago?
It's $10 an hour.
10?
And hopefully, with cost of living, gas is going up, milk is going up, it would be adjusted every year. But right now it's $10 an hour, which is still not enough. No one's going to get rich off of $10 an hour.
Right.
But it is, at least provides a basis for people to survive.
Right. And so now you all came here because what you're saying is exactly what Inglewood did. I mean,
that's right.
And so I would imagine that there's a lot to go back to Chicago with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've learned a lot here, and we hope to not only write about it, but to share it with our colleagues and friends in Chicago as they are in the midst of this debate.
What is the split as it relates to who wants it and who doesn't? Is it down the middle, or I know here it was like 70% against Walmart, something in that area?
I mentioned earlier about so-called leaders. So I would say there's a split between self-proclaimed leaders in the black community and black residents and citizens. There was a public opinion poll taken 2 weeks ago, and 90% of African Americans are supportive of only allowing Walmart and Target and other stores into the city if they pay a living wage. So there's overwhelming grassroots support for this. Right. But in terms of many of our clergy and many of our political activists, they are against the living wage bill for Walmart and Target. And I can only speculate as to why that might be. Right. Some of it is they've gotten promises from Walmart for jobs. Some of it is they've gotten checks from Walmart for programs or whatever else. Right. So there is a split between so-called leadership and grassroots residents in black communities in Chicago. That's the progress.
With the highest percentage being the grassroots folk and community.
That's right.
Have you interviewed all of the city council people and the mayor here in Inglewood?
Here, we have interviewed 3 of the 4 city council members here. We'll be interviewing the 4th tomorrow. We've attempted to interview the mayor, and we hope to be able to interview him. So far, he hasn't responded yet to our request, but we're really hopeful that we can hear his voice and his perspective on this issue.
I would imagine so. That must be Judy Dunlap that you.
Oh, we're already scheduled with Councilwoman Dunlap. We're still trying to schedule an interview with the mayor.
Right. Well, her excuse is she's ill.
Well, she has an excuse.
Right. But no, a fascinating story. The fact that you guys are writing a book. You've come here to kind of get the lay of the land because the same thing's about to happen.
Yes.
In Chicago. Are you from Chicago?
I'm from Chicago, born and raised.
Why do you look like a movie star?
I always wanted to come out to LA County.
No, I mean, I just think it's a great look, and I'm so happy that you're an academic and not.
Pays much less.
Okay, we're back, and what we're doing now is we brought Virginia back to sit with Dorian, and we're going to really now talk about something I wanted the both of you in on. We're talking about the neighborhoods and the people that make up the neighborhoods in Chicago, the leverage that they have to deal with issues like the Walmart issue, as opposed to Inglewood. What are the processes and how different are they?
They're very different, and we think that that's a very important part of our story. In Inglewood, and we're still trying to figure this out, but you have a process, and you have a planning process, that when new development comes in, these developers need to go to city council, right? They need to go to the planning commission. There need to be impact studies, like environmental impact studies. We need to understand how traffic impacts the neighborhood. Just by having that in place enables citizens, community residents, to have some input into those decisions. And it makes that process of economic development more transparent. Now, we know sometimes it doesn't always happen exactly like that. You know, a developer might pull one politician aside and have a conversation before other council members may know. But the structures are in place for these decisions to be more transparent. Whether the community does anything with that opportunity is a whole nother question. And it doesn't, so in that sense, those structures, they can matter or they cannot matter. Here they mattered because Inglewood residents took the opportunity that was made available to them to have some say into the process. And that was what I think was so galling to Inglewood residents, that they have a history of participation. May not be all the time mobilized, to the degree that they were around Walmart, but they appreciate having that opportunity. The referendum was going to take away that local control, and from what we understand, that was incredibly galling, right? And so this was something that really unified people. Although we think that this issue of economic justice was important to many people as well. What kind of jobs was Walmart going to bring in, and what kind of impact was it going to have on the rest of the community, particularly its impact on mom and pop stores? The process is very different in Chicago about community say around economic development questions. And that's something that I'd like Dorian to talk about. And then we'd also like to talk about sort of different mobilization comparing Inglewood to Chicago and the different stages that those are in. But Dorian can speak to the Chicago case.
One of the big differences between the process of economic development decision-making between Inglewood and Chicago is that in Chicago, residents are in the dark about how any economic development decisions get made. Generally, there are no public hearings. There's no transparent process for a developer coming to an alderman or the city council to say, this is what we want. These tend to be private conversations between an individual city council member and a developer, gets approved to the council, the mayor stamps it, and that's it. Residents have no clue about the process. All they know is they might drive by a certain intersection one day and there's nothing there. The next couple of weeks they drive by, something's being built. They have no sense, we in Chicago have no sense that we have any voice or power in the process of economic development in the city. It just sort of happens magically, and we don't know exactly how it happens. So the Walmart debate for us, for the first time, raised this issue of local democracy. Do we have a right to have a voice in deciding what kind of development we want in our communities? Or does Walmart have that right? Or does the alderman have that right? Shouldn't we as residents have that right? And so that's one of the big differences between that process here in Inglewood and the process in Chicago.
Now, in Chicago, because of this Walmart decision, this is one of the first times that we've seen a coalition of actors come together to demand more transparency in this process and to really raise questions about what kind of development. And it's great. I mean, it's very exciting what's happening. It's very exciting that the groups that are involved in this coalition are even raising these sorts of questions. What's, though, somewhat different about Inglewood, and here I want to talk about Los Angeles as a region, that you actually have a long movement that's been in place, and I'm sure I don't have exactly, I'm not a historian, but probably 10 to 15 years of groups, of organizations saying, we need to have a voice in this, and we need development to be accountable to us. We no longer accept the argument that we'll come and build and the benefits will just trickle down. Of course we'll hire residents in your neighborhood when we build. That is something that I personally believe Los Angeles has been on the leading edge for the nation around raising those questions and saying, you know what, we don't have to give everything away. And this gets back to this question that you had raised earlier about, is this an urban-rural issue? And I would say very much so. This is where I would say city residents, people in urban communities, and particularly communities of color, have said enough already. We have been told what we're going to get or what we're not going to get, and to put up, put up subsidies, give tax breaks, give away the farm, basically, so that we can get some sort of development in. And then we find out that our neighbors never get hired, that people who work those jobs drive in from someplace else. And you know what? Those people don't look like us either. They're not African American. They're not Latino. And that's a problem for us, because what we thought that we were getting was development that would benefit us. And Los Angeles is a place where that conversation has started. And it started with a number of organizations, one being LANE, the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy. And they have been at the forefront of raising issues around what sometimes get called community benefits. Okay, if you're going to come in, how do we benefit? You've told us in the past that we will. Now we want it in writing.
Don't trick us. You can't trick us.
Don't trick us.
Right.
We want you to be accountable to us. We want policy, or we want a negotiated agreement of some sort that says you will guarantee to, and I'm going to sound a little bit like a policy wonk, but something called first source hiring, that you will sign off to the first place that we go when we look to hire people is a community hiring hall. And we guarantee that X percent of our first hires will come from people who came through that community hiring hall. It's the model of the old apprentice programs, right? And of the old union hiring halls. But with labor not having the sort of presence it does now in the community that it used to have, how do we think about other ways to do that? And we can. And LA has been at the forefront of winning these agreements, but also seeing it come through policy. What I think is so interesting is that Inglewood itself came up with a lot of these ideas, but then also ended up working in partnership with LANE, but really seemed to have an indigenous movement of folks who just said, you know what, we we maybe could get something better than a Walmart. And we want a guarantee. And so how do we do that? And now we want not only a guarantee, but now you're telling us that we can't have any say in the process whatsoever. And that was incredibly, at least for somebody like myself looking from the outside in, exciting about how Inglewood residents came together to really challenge that paradigm of whatever the corporation dictates, city residents will accept.
Will Chicago get to that point, do you think?
We will know a week from today if Chicago will.
Okay.
Chicago has chosen a similar but different strategy of guaranteeing racially and economically just economic development. So one strategy would be to get a corporation to sign a community benefits agreement directly with a community. The Chicago strategy right now is to mandate through the city council and the power of the city council that any, in this case, big box store that does business in the city is mandated by the city to pay a living wage, to offer health care benefits, to hire from the local community. So these are two similar and tandem strategies, a little different, but they both would have the same effect of making sure that the possible benefits of these developments go back to that local community.
Now, how is the city council in Chicago, it is called the city council.
Yes.
How are they divided on this? There are more, there are only 4 here.
So there are 50
My goodness.
city council members in Chicago.
How does that break down?
There are roughly, it's about a third African American, about a third white, and about a third Latino.
Oh, okay.
Of the 50 total, 33 have signed on as co-sponsors of this big box living wage ordinance.
Okay.
So it's more than a majority. They would only need 26 to pass the ordinance, but 33 have signed on. There is obviously some opposition, and the mayor is strongly opposed to this.
Oh, okay.
Our mayor, Richard Daley,
Sure.
is the son of the legendary Richard J. Daley, who ran the Chicago machine.
Oh,
for
yes.
years. And
Created
Richard,
it.
Little Richie, still runs a machine in Chicago.
Okay.
And so that's one of the differences, I think, between Chicago and Inglewood, is that the mayor has rebuilt the machine. A little different from his father's, but a machine nonetheless.
Yeah.
And so he does wield an extraordinary amount of power in terms of demanding that city council members vote his way. Now, here's something interesting that's happened in Chicago the last 4 months or 6 months. The federal prosecutor, federal government, has come in and convicted several of the mayor's top aides of corruption.
Get out.
And
I mean,
it started
get
to
out.
wobble the machine. So it's good. It's a new day in Chicago, we hope. But the mayor's power is beginning to weaken. And so one indication of this weakening of his power due to this federal corruption case is that we have 33 aldermen who have signed on to say Walmart and Target have to pay a living wage, even though the mayor's opposed. So assuming it passes next week, he'll probably veto it, and they'll probably override his veto.
So Little Richie will lose that one, I think.
He might lose that one. He's up for re-election next year, too, so we're waiting to see if he'll have a challenger as well.
Daily thing can't go on forever. You know?
Well, you'd be surprised.
Is there another one in the wing?
No, he has but his whole family, his brother is on the county committee, they still wield a lot of power in the city of Chicago.
We should add, though, that this is history in the making. This city council vote is next week. The city council was supposed to vote on this in June, and there was a somewhat arcane rule that was used by an alderman to defer and publish. So basically saying, we want a little bit more time to think about this. Let's move it to next month. Because the coalition had done such a good job of mobilizing aldermen, and particularly black aldermen, to sign off on this living wage agreement, ordinance. That extra month, Walmart woke up. And this is why we think Walmart learned a lot from Inglewood. Walmart has not been as aggressive or as arrogant in Chicago. And it's very difficult to prove this, but I think that it's also not so difficult to make comparisons or to draw parallels. And and to say, huh, Walmart isn't acting the same in Chicago as it did in Inglewood, and maybe it's because Inglewood really schooled Walmart. But now they have mobilized very effectively, unsure what the means are that they've used to do that, to now split, as Dorian was talking about earlier, the black community particularly. So this is where we get back to our larger issues of race, class, and urban economic development, and how does this break out? Because there is a large contingency of black ministers in Chicago who have said, we need jobs at any cost. And where we find, now what we understand from the Inglewood case is that people really went to the ballot box thinking about local control. But people were also having a conversation about economic justice and about what kind of jobs we want. And if we want jobs for our kids to go into, we're concerned about what those jobs look like, and we're willing to stand up and fight. That doesn't seem to be happening among some black ministers, black aldermen, some residents in the black community, that they're saying we'll take a job at any cost. And I understand that can be a hard thing when you're looking at very high unemployment rates, but you are setting yourself on a trajectory, a path of development. And that's important because it's not these academic terms like economic development. It really comes down to when you wake up, where do you go to work? Are you respected? Are you paid well? Can you come home and have enough energy to play with your kids? Can you buy a house? Can you take a drive to the beach? Can you even afford to put gas in the car? I mean, these are really critical issues about what kind of society do we want? What kind of families do we want to have? What kind of communities do we want to have? So we're hoping that that conversation will happen to a larger extent in Chicago, and we really feel like it did happen here in Inglewood.
Well, I was going to say in closing, because we do have to go, that Inglewood and its experience, and the fact that you are now, the two of you have been here talking to people and will be talking to more people, can only help the Chicago situation. As I said, people are watching Chicago, the Walmart, Inglewood Walmart thing all over the country and probably the world. And it has had an effect. And the fact that you're here, learning what you're learning here, I just think that the Inglewood experience has got to be a positive one for what's going to happen in Chicago. If we can get those guys in the $2,000 suits wanting the guy that's wearing discount clothes to, speak for him, that's anyway. Having said that, it's been a wonderful sit down here at the Urban Roundtable with two incredible human beings doing some wonderful work. I thank you, Virginia. I thank you, Dorian.
Thank you very much. Thanks
Thank
for inviting
you.
us.
I want to thank the people of Inglewood for taking time out of their very busy lives to speak with us about their fight and their struggle.
Good luck with the book and come back.
We'll be back.
All right. We're out of here.